Good morning, everyone. This is Nathan Lindorf with The Rational Independent, and today we had 3 strong contenders for articles to look at on Reddit, so I decided rather than pick one from the 3, we will lightning round our way through all of them. First contender from the New Republic: the banality of evil. The polls prove it. Many Republicans love fascism. Trump keeps cranking up the Nazi-esque rhetoric because his supporters are eating it up. It is no longer controversial to speak plainly about the authoritarian shift of the Republican Party led by Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton was dragged in 2016 for saying, "You could put half of Trump's supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables, the racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it." When Biden described the extreme MAGA philosophy as semi-fascism earlier this year, hardly anyone blinked. That's because they were all probably asleep, because President Biden is less charismatic than Hillary Clinton, which is saying quite a bit. Saying that someone is extreme MAGA is semi-fascism, that's just a fluffy, but whatever. This is in part due to the shift in conventional wisdom about Trump, and partly due to Trump and the GOP not even bothering to hide their authoritarian aims anymore. Which party is trying to control more parts of your life? The Republicans or the Democrats? I'm no big fan of the Republicans, but I would love to hear a coherent argument where someone is able to explain to me how the Republican Party is authoritarian in a way that the Democrat Party is not, and that authoritarianism is now suddenly bad. I thought Democrats liked authoritarian government, or is it just authoritarian government they control? It's fine when my side does it. Okay, we're going to go through the laundry list. We've done these in detail before. Trump referred to his opponents as vermin, trying to destroy America and destroy the American dream, claimed that immigrants are poisoning the blood of our nation. Not really, meaning that's not really what he said. The Hitlerian overtones, yeah, we have some common words. That doesn't mean he means the same thing. Have not gone unnoticed, yet the man who promises to be dictator on day one, if you go look at the context, it's clearly a joke. Donald Trump tells jokes. He makes people laugh. People like him because he makes them laugh. That doesn't mean that you can try and create valid criticism of the man by taking a joke out of context. He said, "No, I'm not going to be a dictator." And then he said, "Actually, I'll be a dictator on day one. It's a joke." Everybody laughed. Go look at the video. It's right there.
You would never abuse power as retribution against anybody.
Except for day one.
Except
Look,
for?
he's going crazy. Except for day one.
Meaning?
I want to close the border and I want to drill.
That's
drill,
not
drill.
That's not retribution.
I'm going to be, you know, he keeps, we love this guy. He says, "You're not going to be a dictator, are you?" I said, no, other than day one. We're closing the border and we're drilling. After that, I'm not a dictator, okay?
How could this be? Now, surveys back this up. A recent poll of likely Iowa caucus goers found that 42% of them were more likely to vote for Trump based on his assertion that immigrants are poisoning the blood of the country. I actually went and looked up the survey, and they're right. That is the question that was asked by the pollsters, which is not a valid quote. It's very frustrating, taken out of context, and it's more inflammatory. What is intriguing is that there were 4 or 5 of his controversial statements that were in the poll. One of them was this, and yes, indeed, 40 some odd percent said that would make them more likely to vote. Why leave it to theory? Let's look at it black and white. So these are the questions that are controversial. The radical left thugs that live like vermin, more likely. Trump is the only one who will prevent World War III, more likely. Immigrants who enter the U.S. illegally are poisoning the blood of America, more likely. Trump calls himself the most pro-life president in American history, more likely. 2020 election fraud justifies terminating parts of the Constitution. Again, most of these quotes are pretty far out of context, but even taking that at face value, less likely. These diehard supporters are against him terminating parts of the Constitution. To deal with immigration, Trump would authorize sweeping raids, giant camps, mass deportations. Again, out of context. But even as stated, more likely. If re-elected president, Trump would seriously look at alternatives to Obamacare, more likely. If re-elected president, Trump would have no choice but to lock up his political opponents, less likely, or does not matter. Here's what I take from that. These people responding to this poll want the rule of law. They are pro-Constitution, pro-national border, pro-legal immigration, pro-life, and pro-freeing up the regulation in the healthcare industry that Obamacare made even worse. That's not how the pollsters put it. But if you look at the way the things that the supporters agree with and the things they don't agree with, that gives us a rubric for what is the lens of these voters. Again, taking them seriously, not necessarily specifically literally. Okay, which is to say Hillary Clinton was correct. About half of Republicans hear Trump's rhetoric and think, yes, this is exactly what I want. Because they're hearing him say, I will take the issues of illegal immigration seriously. I will take border policy seriously. I will take healthcare issues seriously. Pro-life issues seriously. These are issues that are important to Republican voters. These are valid policy positions that many, many people in America take seriously. And when they hear a candidate saying, I will fight for you on these issues, they resonate with that. This isn't news. It just so happens that these are topics that this author and Hillary Clinton, that they are against. And so they see someone who is opposing them as evil. And of course, therefore, must be fascist. An unbreakable plurality of the GOP explicitly wants fascism. There is a strain in the left today that honestly believes that sentence. Believe that the Republican Party, the party of weenie white bread Mitt Romney, who put almost no policy through in Congress, who rarely stop anything the Democrats want to do, that somehow this party, animated by the evil orange man who is bad and evil and orange, somehow that party wants to enact fascism. Direct government control over the economy, the means of production, and an abrogation of civil liberties. This is a fever dream. The only party that I see that wants strong authoritarian control over the economy and abridging our ability to exercise free speech, freedom of religion, freedom to peacefully assemble, etc., is on the left. And I'm not even necessarily going to blame Democrats per se, because most Democrats are mushy. But the people who are the most vocal on the left are pushing for the strong authoritarian controls. I see that on the left. I don't see it on the right. Please point out to me what I'm missing. He goes over some other stuff, and then he says, which leaves us where we are today. One party is dedicated to bringing about a dictatorship that plans to seize power for a generation or two, purging society of the enemies that are purportedly destroying the nation from within. The other party is a vaguely center-left coalition, too weak to bring about effective change because the country's constitution and societal fragmentation make it politically and legally impossible. The way you're framing this is that on the right, you have this crazy-driven ideologue who wants to bring about a dictatorship that will purge American society of its enemies that are purportedly destroying the nation from within. This is language that describes genocide, that prescribes pogroms and all sorts of other crazy things from history. The other party is vaguely center-left, too weak to bring about effective change. And what are the opponents of their effective change? The country's constitution, correct, and societal fragmentation. Why is society fragmented? Is it possible that identity politics creates a fragmented society? Unless you mean something else when you say societal fragmentation, which makes it politically and legally impossible. What he's saying is that the left coalition sees the Constitution as a legal barrier from enacting the changes they want to do. And somehow they're the good guys in this. All right, we're going to leave that there and jump over to Bernie Sanders, who's trying desperately to be relevant. Bernie Sanders calls on Congress to reject unconditional military aid to Israel. So there's a supplemental funding bill, $10-some-odd billion that Congress is trying to give to Israel. He said the supplemental funding bill gives aid for the right-wing Netanyahu government to continue its brutal war against the Palestinian people. Interesting framing, that the war is Israel's war. Let's hold on to that for just a second. Senator Bernie Sanders called on Tuesday for Congress to reject the $10.1 billion aid to Israel. Now, It's phrased as Netanyahu's illegal and immoral war against the Palestinian people. Interesting that the subheadline and this headline somehow have different quotes. In a statement, Sanders said the supplemental funding bill gives aid for the right-wing government. Okay, so maybe one was a verbal statement, one was a written statement, whatever. Enough is enough. Congress must reject that funding. The taxpayers of the United States must no longer be complicit in destroying the lives of innocent men, women, and children in Gaza. Sanders said the issue is complicated, adding that while we recognize that Hamas's barbaric terrorist attack began this war, you're saying that the terrorists began this war, but it's Israel's war. No, I got nothing. We must also recognize that Israel's military response has been grossly disproportionate, immoral, and in violation of international law. Sanders, one of the first members of Congress to call for a humanitarian pause, is now one of the first to call for an end to unconditional aid to Israel. Okay, hard truths. All right, this may not make me popular. I don't care. War is the measure of statecraft of last resort, whereby you punish your enemy's military, command structure, and population until they yield. One of the reasons why we have forever wars in the modern era, one of the reasons why we don't prosecute wars effectively, is because we're trying to make war nice. War is not nice. War is barbaric. War, by its nature, leads to catastrophe. It leads to grossly disproportionate, immoral, etc., etc. That's how war works. Here's what we're dealing with. One side attacks the other side's population centers and harms innocent civilians. In response, their population centers are hit as well, and therefore one side is moral and the other side is immoral? No. Now, I'm not advocating for a genocidal conflagration. I'm not advocating on either side. The river to the sea is a euphemism for wiping out the Jewish people. Not okay. What I'm saying is simply this. In the West, we have gotten soft because we have somehow decided that if we're just technologically advanced enough, if we're just smart enough, if we're just kind enough, if we just throw enough money at the problem, we can solve these thorny issues that have persisted for centuries, if not millennia, without harming innocents. The simple reality is, if two nations, if two groups of people cannot resolve their differences peaceably, then they will resolve them with violence. And violence always interferes with the innocent, to a small scale or a large scale. That's why we need to find better ways to resolve things peaceably. That's why things that reduce freedom of speech in America and elsewhere are counterproductive. Because when you have a genuine difference of opinions, genuine difference of beliefs, and you suppress people's ability to debate that thoroughly, you are driving those feelings and emotions and issues underground and suppressing them, and when they come out, they explode, and that creates violence. Suppressing speech leads to violence. It's human nature. You can't change it. That's why I'm a free speech absolutist. It is in an effort to reduce the amount of violence in the world. When it comes to U.S. aid to Israel, when it comes to Israel versus Hamas, etc., that is a thorny issue. That is an issue that apparently they didn't feel like touching on any degree of complexity other than to passively note that Hamas started it. I will touch on one more thing and then be done. The idea of humanitarian pauses is nonsense. And here's why. Throughout the history of this conflict, when there is a ceasefire for a period of time, regardless of the duration of the ceasefire, Hamas breaks it early. I mean, if you want to look at the record, it's real clear. They provide a ceasefire, and 2 hours later, there's another Hamas attack. 6 hours later, there's another Hamas attack. 12 hours later, whatever. One of the reasons for that probably is a lack of organization on the Hamas side. Another one is that they are driven by an insatiable desire to exterminate the Jewish people. By they, let me be specific, I mean Hamas. That is not all of Palestine. Let's give Hamas's numbers all the credence we can give. And let's say, cold reality, tens of thousands of innocent Palestinian civilians have died in this conflict. One, in other major wars, much worse things have happened. Two, if things don't change, it could get a lot worse before it gets a lot better. Three, if Israel stopped showing restraint and really wanted to harm Palestinian civilians, it could get a lot worse overnight. Those are just cold realities. The reason why we bombed Japan into submission, the reason why we firebombed Tokyo, the reason why we bombed Germany into rubble was to try, the purpose of war is to eliminate your opponent's ability to conduct war back on you. You break their warfighting capability, you break their spirit, you force them to unconditionally surrender and accept your terms. That's how war works. If this is a war, then that's how war should be conducted. Because if you conduct it in that way, it is over faster and more thoroughly, and you can force a recalcitrant opponent to change course. Germany and Japan are two of the most civilized, productive, industrious countries in the world right now. And they were two drivers of chaos in World War II. How did we change course for their countries? We broke them. We destroyed their warfighting capability and forced them to unconditionally surrender and accept that they had to change their ways to rejoin the international community. That's not a pleasant process, but it is the only process that has hope for peace when you have an opponent that will not listen to reason. And if there's one thing the last 70 years of conflict have taught us, it is that the die-hard, genocidal terrorists will not listen to reason. So there you go. I've said a bunch of things that'll make people mad at me. So much the better. Lastly, J6. Federal judge quickly disposes of Trump's immunity claims while ruling in favor of Brian Sicknick's estate in January 6th lawsuit. Let me break this down for you. First off, law and crime is a bit of a mess, but we'll set that to the side. Now, in Washington, D.C., there's a judge overseeing a wrongful death lawsuit. All right. Wrongful death is a civil claim. Civil, criminal, two different animals. It is a civil claim where they are seeking damages from a party that caused wrongful death. Wrongful death in a civil court has a lower burden of proof than a criminal. So when we're talking about the wrongful death of Brian Sicknick, what we're saying is, just putting it in its proper framing, we're not accusing Donald Trump of murder. Okay, that's a criminal statute. There's a civil suit filed in DC court where the survivors of Brian Sicknick, his estate, are suing Donald Trump, saying that Donald Trump's actions made him culpable for a death that shouldn't have occurred. And if so, he needs to pay them some damages. He needs to monetarily compensate them for that wrongful death. Put in a different context, this is the same thing as, I'm a homeowner, I go on vacation, I don't lock my pool fence. The neighbor's kid comes in, opens up my pool fence, drowns in my pool. I didn't murder the child, but I was negligent. And because I was negligent, I am culpable for monetary damages if a wrongful death suit is brought against me. That's the general idea of what we're talking about here. What we're dealing with is that the court said, no, Trump doesn't get to be immune from this suit. All right, fine, whatever. Now let's talk about the facts. Officer Sicknick was involved in the Capitol breach. He was involved in physical entanglements with protesters. At one point, the news reported that he had been beaten to death with a fire extinguisher. Well, that proved to not be the case. However, what did happen is that he was pepper sprayed in the face, which is certainly no fun. Definitely happens. It's definitely a very unpleasant experience. And then he died on January 7th. So he didn't die on January 6th. He died a day later. Now, why did he die? A series of strokes. This is a tragedy. This is not something anyone wishes for. This is a man who should still be alive, we would hope. However, the case that's being made here is that Donald Trump said some stuff which caused third parties to take part in a demonstration that was located and acting in a place they were not allowed to be, a restricted area. And because they were there, they came in contact with a Capitol Police officer. And these third parties, in the midst of that altercation, chose to apply a chemical irritant to a police officer. That's felony battery as far as I'm concerned. Not okay. And that police officer, a day later, had a stroke and died. And what they're trying to say in the law is that the president, who said some things, is responsible for his death. Now, there's a lot of lawyering back and forth, and there's a lot of precedent, and this is law and crime. They see things from the legal perspective. There's multiple cases and precedents and whatnot where Trump is involved in these things where he's being sued by a variety of people, and he's claiming immunity. Here's why he's claiming immunity. As President of the United States, if he orders a drone strike on a cafe in Kabul, and he, as part of that drone strike, it explodes and kills an American citizen, that American citizen is not allowed to sue the president. The president is immune from those claims because he was acting in his duty. The same thing as if a police officer is conducting a raid on a warehouse where they think drugs are being stored. They have a warrant, everything's legit, and he goes in and one of the warehouse workers freaks out, slips, falls, and hurts themselves. They can't sue the police officer because the police officer is personally immune because he put himself in that dangerous situation and created the hazard for that worker because he was pursuing his official duties. That's how this kind of immunity works. And it's not that crazy of a claim. So what Donald Trump is basically saying, if I want to steel case his position, as President of the United States, I speak to the public all the time. What the public chooses to do with that is on them. I can speak at a rally. I can promote my political agenda. I can put forward, I am allowed to speak whatever I want to say, up to and including things like George Bush basically issuing threats against nation states saying, if you harbor terrorists, we're going to come and invade you and kill all of you. That's an explicit threat of violence. He's not culpable for that because as the president, sometimes you need to threaten and execute violence. All that wrapped up is to say the DC court, shockingly, tossed out Trump's immunity claims and said, nope, this gets to proceed forward, which means they are trying to set a precedent whereby if a political figure says something that a nutter takes seriously or twists, because nutters twist all sorts of things, and that nutter commits violence, and someone is tangentially harmed by that violence, again, the link from pepper sprayed in the face to a stroke the next day is a tenuous link at best, that political figure is personally culpable. So here's my question. Do you guys remember the Republican baseball shooter? There was a nutter who listened to a lot of what Bernie Sanders said and subscribed to his beliefs and followed him on Facebook, I think, and commented on his stuff and was a big Bernie Sanders supporter, who then went and shot up a bunch of U.S. congresspeople. Super not okay. Definite harm was done. I personally think it's a bad precedent to say Bernie Sanders should be able to be sued for that. So when you're thinking about setting precedent in the law, try, I know it's hard, but just try and get yourself out of the frame of Orange Man Bad and say, would I still be in favor of this position if Trump was not involved? Is that something that still seems sound and reasonable to me? So there you go. Triple header today. Nathan Lindorf with The Rational Independent. This has been my Reddit rant. Good luck out there.